Podcasting. Does that sound good? Is this thing on? I'm burnt out. I'm so burnt out right now. Hello. Welcome back to another episode of Patchats. Now, I just want to start by saying this episode is not going to be for everybody. In fact, this episode will be for almost nobody. This episode is mostly for me, which is kind of what all the podcasts are, if we're being honest. If we're being really brutally honest with ourselves, all the podcasts are mostly for me. But this podcast is especially for me. It's very, as they say, inside baseball, because it's about baseball. It's about the sport of baseball, and now I know I've lost most of you. I used the B word, and you're like, gross. I don't like bases. I don't like balls. I like getting to second base, but I certainly don't like America's pastime. That shit is boring and for white people. And you wouldn't be totally wrong on either of those accounts. Now, as I said, this podcast is going to be about baseball, and not just any baseball. Actually, I always do this at the beginning of the podcast, which is, lead up into what is the podcast going to be about when you've already read the title of the episode. So you already know. So I don't know why I'm spending 2 minutes dither-dathering, blither-blathering, I don't know, sayings about it's about Barry Bonds. So the podcast, it's about baseball. Strike one, baseball reference. It's about regional San Francisco Bay Area baseball. Strike two. It's about an individual baseball player and his career aspirations and Hall of Fame status. Strike three. Now that you have all stopped listening, this is my podcast for the man, the myth, the legend, Barry Bonds. Barry Bonds, in my humble opinion, and granted, I want you to know I was an avid baseball fan for over 6 years of my life. Yeah, that's right. 6 whole years. I was a big baseball fan. Ages 10, actually it was more than 6 years. Ages 10 to about 18, 8 years of my life I dedicated to the sport of baseball. Granted, already by the time I was about 16, my interest in the sport was waning. It was declining. The height of my baseball passion, my baseball love was really ages like 11, 12, 13, 14, that era. And that happened to coincide, not by chance, with Barry Bonds' historic career home run record chase, his single-season home run record chase in 2001, age 11, the Giants' World Series appearance, 2002, those damn rally monkeys with the Los Angeles Angels, they got us. Devastating. Would have been a memory I would have cherished forever. I was in San Francisco for Game 6, watching the game. We were going to go somewhere and celebrate if the Giants won, but they didn't win. And then later they ended up winning the World Series in, what was that, 2010? 2010, they ended up winning the World Series. And it was cool, but I had already moved on, I had discovered drinking, if I'm being honest. I had discovered I was very into my passion of distance running. I know I went from one of the coolest things you could be into, baseball, to an even cooler thing, distance running. That's right. I was just climbing the ladder. No, I don't know. I was in college. I had a girlfriend. There were just better things to do than follow every single game of 162. That's a thing. For people who are watching this podcast who know nothing about baseball, which I don't know why you would, because this is going to be insufferable for you. But there are 162 games in a season. Each game is minimum 3 hours. Your team plays basically, 6 or 7 days a week for months. From April until September. April, May, June, July, August, like 6 months, half the year. The season goes on for half the year. Like, what an insane sport that they're like, let's stretch this out to 6 days a week, 6 or 7 days a week for half of the year. And you as a fan, if you're like a hardcore fan like I was, you commit to like basically trying to watch every single game. So you need to be a 12-year-old boy who like hasn't discovered, to have the amount of free time you need to really dedicate to this sport, to dedicate to following the sport full time. And I just don't have that anymore. But when I was 12, it was all I needed. It was all I needed. Baseball was my best friend. Yeah. I could have used a few better social skills when I was young. So, here's the rub. Here is why I am dedicating this episode to the baseball player Barry Bonds. Besides for the fact that he inspired in me a love of baseball, and he, some of my favorite memories from that era of my life, early adolescence, whatnot, 100% because of Barry, my boy, BB25. And recently, not that recently, I don't know, it was like months ago now, his final attempt at being voted into the Hall of Fame came up and passed. He did not get the number of votes he needed to make it into the Hall of Fame. And I remember, I think it was in like February or something. I remember when the article came up and I saw it and I was reading the article and I found myself getting angry, like very, very upset, like making mental arguments in my head about, why this was bullshit and why the Baseball Writers Association of America are full of shit for not voting him in and all this crap. And I thought, like, that's wild. Like, I still really, like, I don't give a shit about baseball anymore. I mean, who could? How could you give a shit about baseball at this point? But I give a big shit about Barry Bonds still for some reason. It evokes something. And so when I saw his Hall of Fame denial, which by the way, he'll still probably like get into the Hall of Fame from the article I read. Technically, it's just the normal route that someone gets into the Hall of Fame, which is that the Baseball Writers Association, they all vote and then the player makes it into the Hall of Fame. That route is out. You have like I don't know how long it is, but I think it's like an 8-year window or something like that. And if you don't make it each year or in any of those 8 years, then they take you off the ballot and you're no longer eligible to make it into the Hall of Fame that way. And so in that moment, I was like, I'm going to make a podcast and make my case for why Barry Bonds is a Hall of Fame player. I know this is a terrible subject to do a podcast about, but I need to do it. I need to do it for Barry. I got to do it for Barry because Barry did a lot for me. Okay, Barry did a lot for me, and so I'm gonna give a impassioned, stat-driven argument for why Barry Bonds was a clear Hall of Famer. A clear Hall of Famer. Now, for those of you who don't know Barry Bonds, maybe the greatest hitter of all time. He owns the single-season home run record. He owns the all-time season home run record. He has many accolades, awards, achievements that I will get into. But the thing that he is most known for is the steroid era of baseball. Now, I'm just going to say, if you don't like baseball, if you don't know, just like if you don't understand that baseball exists and that there was like a steroid problem at a certain point, this isn't the podcast for you. Like I have a story that I try to tell sometimes in my stand-up about playing baseball. And in Berlin, I have to like literally explain the rules of baseball, like how a strike zone works and that there's a pitcher and a batter. And I just caught myself, like I was about to start going into that. And I'm like, I can't. Okay. I want this podcast to be a tight 40, a tight 40. And so I can't. So either, just listen to another episode of the Patchats podcast, or, go watch some documentary. Go watch Ken Burns' 9-part documentary series about the history of baseball. I'm kidding. Don't. I watched it at the time that I was into baseball, and it was almost insufferable then. It's just, I love you, Ken. I love you, Kenny. But, boy, I don't know if we needed 9 parts about baseball, the history of baseball. So anyways, yeah, if you don't know about baseball, I can't explain this. But so Barry Bonds, he's most known for his steroid scandal. And a lot of people, the home run ball that set the single season record, some rich guy bought it and like branded it with an asterisk. Some tech guy, by the way, which this happened in like, I think it was maybe 2006, 2007, which was before I feel like people were really, like it was a mainstream idea. Oh boy, should have put where's my alcohol-free Studebaker? Come on, Studebaker, get me my alcohol-free Atlantic Ale. Where's the sponsorship? Let's go. Anyways, this was kind of before, tech, before it had become a mainstream idea that tech people sucked, that like these tech companies all sucked. Their, garage founder, CEO people were all douchebags. This was like, people hadn't realized yet that tech was ruining San Francisco. It was still just like, ooh, the money's flowing, and maybe that's just because I was 12. I'm sure there were like advocates on the ground who were already like, no. But now, I mean, it's like a mainstream thing. People are like, oh, fuck Elon Musk, fuck fuck the tech people. But at the time, it wasn't a thing. And that's when I already knew, this like eccentric tech millionaire bought the single season home run ball and branded it with an asterisk and then sent it to the Hall of Fame, which is like, what a dumb way to spend your, like, what an attention grab, like what are you trying to achieve there? It's like, okay, we get either just don't buy the ball, like grow up and don't buy the ball, or buy it. Like, I don't know. I don't give a shit, but like you're annoying. I don't even remember who it was, but whoever it was, fuck you. And so, there's a lot of controversy, stirring around him. And as years have gone by, it's basically come out that like almost anybody who was good at baseball in that era was taking steroids. Like they were all wrapped up in it, and some of them have bounced back to various degrees and been reaccepted into baseball. Mark McGwire. And some of them were also, that's the thing that frustrates me about the Barry Bonds saga is a lot of those players were kind of nothing without the power that the steroids gave them. And Barry Bonds was so much more than the steroids, which we're gonna get into. But these one-dimensional players who the only reason they were really like so great was in a lot of ways the steroids. A lot of them have, they're coaching again in the league. They've been accepted back. People don't have the same kind of venom and malice. But Barry still, people love to shit on Barry. Barry gets a bad name, and the Baseball Writers Association always hated Barry because he didn't like the press. And the reason he didn't like the press is that they were fucking assholes to his dad, Bobby Bonds, who was also a major league player. Barry Bonds comes from one of the greatest pedigrees of baseball. His godfather is Willie Mays, one of the greatest players ever. I mean, the catch, incredible 660 career home runs, one of the first players to break the color barrier, coming over from the Negro Leagues. And I know I just said Negro Leagues, and that sounds racist. I know when I heard it when I said it, but that's what it was called. But I know in 2022 we should call it like the, I don't know, people of color who were mistreated league. I don't know. That's just the name it was. It makes me uncomfortable too. But he came over from that league and he kicked ass. Dude, 660 home runs, stealing bases, amazing defense. I mean, just one of the best players. The only player kind of above him in home runs was Hank Aaron, who was an incredible hitter, but did not have the all-around game of Willie Mays. So Willie Mays is Barry Bonds' godfather. Bobby Bonds is Barry Bonds' father, who was in all rights a very good baseball player. He had power and he had speed, like Willie Mays. And a fun fact about Barry Bonds and his father Bobby is that they, I believe, and I might have this wrong, are the only father-son duo. So there's only two players who've had over 5 30-30 seasons. And a 30-30 season is a season in which you hit 30 home runs and you steal 30 bases. Now, to be a Major League Baseball player and hit 30 home runs or steal 30 bases, that's an achievement. That's a good achievement. But to be able to do both, usually it's one or the other. You hit 30 home runs, but you're a big guy, so you can't steal bases. So to be able to hit 30 home runs and steal 30 bases in a season is that really is a mark of greatness. And Barry Bonds and his father Bobby Bonds both had 5 seasons where they had a 30-30 season. So Barry's dad was an amazing baseball player, and his dad played in the era of the 70s and the 80s when baseball was even more of an old boys club of especially with the baseball writers. I mean, let's be honest, there were not a lot of African American baseball writers in the 70s and the 80s. Like there were not. And the press really beat up his dad, Bobby, all the time. So Barry grew up with this like mistrust of the press. And then when he came into the league in the late 80s, so I guess his dad played in like the 60s and the 70s then, something like that. And then Barry came in the league in the late 80s, and he didn't have, a lot of trust with the media, which is fair. Here in 2022, quite a few people don't trust the media anymore. So, he had seen his dad like run out of town by baseball writers and seen the pain and suffering. So he never trusted the press, and he never treated them especially well. He didn't grant a lot of interviews. He was very curt with a lot of the baseball writers, and baseball writers are just nerds. They're sports nerds, because here's the thing: baseball is far and away the nerdiest sport that you can be into. People are going to argue with me and say, oh, what about chess or some shit? Okay, whatever. Maybe there are nerdier sports, but of the major sports, baseball is really the nerdiest sport because it's all math. It's all numbers. It's this kind of slow game with a lot of strategy. There's a lot of, small skills and there's a lot of, as I said, stats and math and, the stuff that I didn't like, that stuff I didn't find exciting. No, really, the only math skills I have are because of baseball. That's really any math skills that I figured out in my life. It wasn't because of school. Sorry, Mr. Cherry, but no, it was because of baseball. And so it's a nerdy sport. Baseball writers, they're following the team, and they wish they were baseball players. That's what a sports journalist. I guarantee you ask to any sports journalist, they'll have some glory days of playing sports. It might be back in Little League, it might be a game-winning hit they had in Little League. It might have been in high school. But, if you're a sports writer, you wanted to be an athlete. And you know why I know this? Because I wanted to be an athlete. I wanted so badly, because of Barry Bonds, to play left field for the San Francisco Giants. And then I tried to play baseball one time when I was 12 years old, and I immediately realized there is no way in hell I'm ever playing professional sports because I'm the worst at my I'm the worst player in my small town's 12-year-olds league. So I'm not making it. And you know what I immediately pivoted to? My new dream after that was I want to be a sports announcer because I was like, at least I can hang around the games and people listen to me talk. I love it when people listen to me talk. So I immediately pivoted. That's how I know. That's how I know all these sports writers. They wanted to be athletes and they couldn't hack it. And so then they're become sports writers. And so these sports writers were never nice to Barry Bonds. They were dicks. And honestly, if we viewed it through the woke lens of 20, and I'm sorry I used the W word. I'm so it's overplayed, and I hate the people who are into the woke stuff, but I also hate the people who are all like, everything's cancel culture, it's all stupid, everything's stupid, everybody sucks. I'm sorry, I can't even use words anymore. But if we looked at the way the relationship with the press, with Barry Bonds, a person of color, in today's lens, I think we would look back and be like, yeah, his dad got the runaround from the press. He saw that. He was not treated particularly well by the press. And so later in his career, when he started having some, major success, he wasn't exactly warm and friendly with all the baseball writers, who, again, are nerds who wish they were athletes. The baseball writers are nerds who wished that they were athletes and couldn't hack it. And so then they had to be like, I guess I'll be a writer. And I know that because I was one of those people. And so they were never nice to Barry Bonds, and that's why he was never particularly nice to them. And that's why, being the childish nerds that they are, they held it over his head, and they didn't let him in the Hall of Fame. They didn't fucking let him in the Hall of Fame, despite the fact that I'm about to give a clear, amazing argument about why that's full of shit. But before I get into we'll close with the boring, my closing arguments, my numbers, my statistics, because I'm also, as I said, a baseball nerd. I do want to just talk a little bit about the emotion of Barry Bonds. We have to set a scene here. I want you guys to understand a little bit. And one important detail of this story, I think, is, in my opinion, Barry Bonds, the greatest baseball player of all time. And I'll make my case for that. I was lucky enough to be a 11-year-old kid at the height of the Barry Bonds phenomenon. Living in the area where it was happening, everybody loved Barry Bonds. Barry Bonds, as hated as he was in many other places within the city and the Bay Area, Barry Bonds was a golden god. He was the shit. And so I got to live in the era when Barry Bonds, the greatest baseball player of all time, in my opinion, played. And he had the greatest baseball announcer of all time in the booth, on the call, every call, John Miller. Now, John Miller, he announced for ESPN, Sunday Night Baseball, but luckily enough, he was the play-by-play, color commentary sometimes, announcer on KNBR, the sports leader, the radio station that covered the Giants games and the baseball or the TV station also. So there was John Miller, Kruk and Kipe, John Kruko, Dwayne Kuiper, both former players for the Giants, who were a dynamic broadcasting duo. And then there was, when I first got into it, there was a guy, I think his name was Angel something. And then, God, who's the new guy? He's not even new. I'll put his name up or something. I'll put a photo of him up. Also, really good announcer. And those were the announcing crew, and they were phenomenal. But John is the best of the best, because being a baseball announcer, it's not just, the amazing voice, the insights about baseball. It's the calls, and then it's also baseball. It's like, 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours sometime, 6 hours if there's a rain delay, and they just throw it to the announcers and they just riff. They just riff and talk stories about being on the road with the team, and it's a slow game, and so you have to fill that air. And John Miller was just the best to do it. He was the best to do it, and so he was on the call for a lot of these major moments. And to be a 12-year-old kid at home in your bedroom listening to KMBR 680, the sports leader, and you hear John Miller on the call as Barry Bonds goes yard again, and he continues to march towards creating a new single-season record for the home run thing in baseball. I mean, Jesus. I mean, talk about a little boy boner. I mean, goddamn, that was an amazing experience. Maybe let's play a clip here. 26 minutes, huh? 26 minutes. John Miller on the call.
Swing, there's a shot into deep right center field. It's on its way. It is gone. And Barry Bonds has launched one. The Giants are on the board. Number 662 for Bonds.
I mean, John Miller, amazing. So you had this amazing synergy of, and by the way, I mean, I think I know a lot of kids from my age that, if you grew up in the Bay Area, Barry Bonds, John Miller, and, you had some connection to baseball. It's like, even if you don't care about baseball anymore, you have good memories about that time. You have good memories about, that era. And Barry Bonds to me is also what made baseball great, because people who don't understand baseball, it's a sport where you really have to understand all of the rules and strategies to appreciate what makes it exciting. And I think one of the things that makes it exciting, it's similar to watching like a fight. Sometimes in a fight, they're just circling each other, and nothing's really happening. It's kind of boring. But what makes the fight exciting is that at any minute, something could happen. A fight can go from nothing happening to another guy on top of the guy, beating the shit out of him, knocking him out. That can happen like that. And that was the thing about when Barry Bonds would go to the plate. When Barry Bonds would go to the plate, everybody was on the edge of their seat. You didn't know what was going to happen. At any moment, it could be a home run. Something exciting was going to happen. When he came to the plate, even if the game was boring, that moment was exciting. Even if the game was far out of reach, if the Giants were down 8-0 and Barry Bonds was coming to the plate, that was still exciting, because that meant that the team that was opposing him was actually going to pitch to him. So you could see what could happen, because that's another thing that would happen to Barry Bonds is opposing team. He was so good. Opposing teams just were like, we can't pitch. We can't throw him anything near that he could hit. He would get what they call intentionally walked all the time. All the time he would get intentionally walked. And, because they were so scared of how good he was. So, that's Barry Bonds was the essence of what, made baseball great. It was this thing that, anything could happen. Anything could happen. Now, let's just look at camera 2 here for a minute while I restart my thing. But this is the last thing before I'll make my big defense of Barry Bonds, is I will admit, and now this is not great for Barry Bonds, I will admit, as a 12-year-old boy, 13-year-old boy at that point I think I was, enamored by the greatness that, I guess I was maybe 13, 14 at that point, enamored by the greatness of Barry Bonds, enamored by, he was my hero. He was really, it was the classic, trope of a little boy or a little girl, whatever, a little person, a child being enamored by this sports star. And that was their hero, and not for any good reason other than the fact that they were very good at sports, very good at a sport for the team in their home city. That's a big thing. And so I just thought, whatever Barry does, that's a good thing to do. Whatever Barry does, that's a good thing to do. And so, as the allegations began to swirl about steroids. It was already happening in, I guess it was 2003, 2004, I think. The allegations were already starting to swirl around Barry, although I would vehemently deny those allegations as a 13. I was like, no, I would fight. That was the age that I would still fight somebody. Now if someone wants to have a confrontation, I run. I'm when people talk about fight or flight, I'm 100% flight. There's no fight in me. I'm 100% flight. But at 13, I was like, if you tell me Barry Bonds took steroids, I will go to the mat with you. Like, let's throw down. I'm going to, But, deep down in my heart of hearts, I also knew Barry Bonds did steroids. And I'm like, if Barry Bonds did steroids, maybe I should do steroids. It worked for Barry. Barry's the best. Barry's my man. BB25, I love Barry. And so I thought to myself, maybe I should do steroids. Maybe I should get in the steroids game. And I want to be a successful athlete. I've surmised after my first few years of leaving the theater, I had a younger childhood that was very much focused on theater and musical theater. And then at some point around age 10, I was like, no, I want to be a sports guy. I want to be a sports boy. I want to be a boy that plays baseball, and I'm into football now, and I'm into all the sports. Look how manly I am. And I'm like, hey guys, let's connect and talk about sports. I love sports. And literally, I would literally be at school and at middle school at lunch listening to call-in sports talk radio. Which now when you say it, pretty boring. Mostly guys in their cars commuting, probably delivery drivers, calling in and sharing their opinions with the radio host about what was happening in the Bay Area sports world. And I would that's how I would spend my lunches at middle school. And then I wonder why I didn't have any friends. But that's how I would I would be in math class. I had a very complex, system where I had my mom's little radio, and then I would put that little radio in the sweatshirt pocket. The little pocket that goes right here. I would put that radio in there, and then I poked a hole inside that sweatshirt pocket that I could run the headphone wire through that hole and plug it into the radio. And then I would run the wire down through my arm, and then I would just have one of the headphone things right there. And I could then just put my hand over my ear like I was just resting my head and listen to the radio. And I wasn't even, sometimes I was listening to Giants games, but a lot of times I was just listening to sports talk radio. I would fake sick. I would tell my mother, I'm not feeling well this morning. I don't think I can go to school. And I was essentially playing hooky from school. I would get her to, call in sick for me. I don't know. I don't know. I feel I feel sick. And I would do that just so that I could stay home and listen to call-in sports talk radio. That was my life. So, I was very obsessed. I was very obsessed. And so when I found out Barry Bonds was taking steroids, I was like, okay, I should take steroids. I want to be a good athlete. I'm not good at sports, and I want to get better. And my very, very rudimental understanding of steroids is that if you take them, that will give you amazing hand-eye coordination and will make you one of the best hitters in baseball. Steroids, they just stick it in your arm, and then you amazingly can just know what a pitcher is going to throw. You're no longer scared of the baseball, and you can hit the baseball very hard. That was my very rudimental understanding of steroids. And so I went to the sketchiest kid I knew at school, Charlie I probably shouldn't say his full name, but his first name was Charlie, I swear to God, and this is before It's Always Sunny came out. He was a Charlie before Charlie from It's Always Sunny came out. And so this kid, Charlie, he was rough around the edges, but he wasn't so rough around the edges that I was scared of him. Also, we were still 13 or something. So it was you still had this thing where you could kind of, and so I went up to Charlie and I was like, hey, I know you're a guy who can get stuff, kids were already buying weed from him and whatnot. I knew he was like, he likes, he could get you drugs, he could get you alcohol. He was that kind of kid. He's a kid who could get you things. So I go up to Charlie and I'm like, Charlie, I think I want some steroids. And he was like, yeah, I can get you some steroids. Again, these are two 13-year-old boys in a middle school. I'm like talking to each other about like, can I buy some steroids off you? And then he was like, yeah, let me talk to some people and like get back to you. And then he's like, well, do you want the steroids that you can like inject, or do you want steroids that are like tablets that you can take? Which, by the way, I don't think that's a real thing. I think he was hoping I would say tablets, he would give me a vitamin, and then I would pay him money for this vitamin. That was going to be his scam. Or the guy who he got stuff from scam. I don't know. Which I think back and I'm like, who the fuck was selling this 13-year-old kid all the drugs that he was selling? And I don't know where Charlie ended up, but probably it's not great. So anyways, I was like, injects? Like, like then it became very real. I was like, oh God, a needle? Like, I don't know if I'm ready for that. And so I told him the tablets. And then my big crush, my 8th grade crush, who was, my first crush, her name was Katie, 4th grade. But that was like, 4th grade crushes that's a crush where you're like, you feel like, oh, I should have a crush. People are having crushes. I need to get myself a crush. I should pick a crush. And so you're like, who should be my crush? You kind of look through the portfolio of people in your class and you're like, Katie is fun to talk to. I guess she could be my crush. And then you just start telling people Katie is my crush. And, that's the thing. Which, by the way, best pickup line ever. When I was like 25, I ran into Katie at a bar night once. And she was like, I'm Katie. I don't know if you remember me. And I was like, Katie, of course I remember. You're my 4th grade crush. Oh, my God. That line killed. And so anyways, but then moving on to 8th grade, my 8th grade crush, Vanessa. And Vanessa was like my first real crush where I was like really like, it wasn't just like, oh, I need to pick a crush. It was really like, Vanessa makes me feel funny. My big fantasy with Vanessa was that we would watch Friends together on the couch under a blanket. That's the level of sexual fantasy that I had at 13. I was like, oh my God, I want Vanessa to come over and we're going to watch Friends. Yes. That was so Vanessa was my 8th grade crush. But Vanessa also, knew Charlie. She, which was one of the things I found so, interesting and attractive about Vanessa was that, she kind of ran in some circles of the rougher kids around the fringes. And so she knew Charlie. She was friends with Charlie. And so somehow it got back to Vanessa that I had asked Charlie for steroids. And she was like, and I guess maybe she knew that there was a crush, or maybe she just knew that, we hung out a little bit or something. And so she was like, dude, what the fuck are you doing? Like, you cannot buy steroids. You're 13. And I was like, what? Let's watch Friends. And I was like, whatever. Like, I'm not going to, I was 13. I was like, what? I just, I could take steroids. Barry Bonds takes steroids. Like, I think I literally said that. So cringe. And so then she told my best friend, Zach, and she was like, you gotta tell him not to buy steroids from Charlie. And this is just so ridiculous and funny. And so then I remember Zach and I hanging out on his trampoline because we were 13-year-old children. And Zach's like, dude, I just gotta be honest with you. Don't buy steroids from Charlie. And I'm like, yeah, okay. Yeah, you're right. Like, honestly, it kind of scared me anyways, talking about syringes and like, I was really never serious. I just wanted to buy steroids. Just like, I don't know. It just felt like something like that would be cool. Like, I should do that. I should get my hands on some steroids. I should take them. I don't know. I got to get better at baseball. So that was, Barry Bonds did kind of lead me towards the path of steroids, but it didn't happen. So that's the one negative caveat I want to say about Barry Bonds. And, it is what it is. Now let's get in and let's get into the stats. We got to wrap this thing up. I said it was going to be a tight 40. We're already at 40. We got to wrap this thing up. So Barry Bonds, here's my whole thing with him. Besides the fact, and look, obviously I've set the stage. You know I'm biased, okay? Because also, age 11, my second year of really caring about baseball, he sets the single season home run record, 73 home runs. It was incredible to be at the games where he was hitting these home runs, so exciting. And then the years after, he was hitting all of these benchmarks. I was at the game where he hit his 500th home run. I was at the game where he passed Hank Aaron with 714 home runs. I was at the game when he hit his 600th home run. I was at the game when he passed Willie Mays, 661. These were super exciting games to go to. And then they had these little pins. If you were at one of the games, they had the historical, these like cups, which I don't have anymore. But then if you could take your ticket stub to the fan, the place where they sell the gear or whatever, and you'd get like a commemorative pin. So I have all of these pins from these like milestones that he reached, and it was incredibly exciting. And besides the fact that he did make me try to buy steroids, he also was the first and only time that I really prayed, because this was clearly a time I'm like looking for I'm trying to figure out who I am. I'm like, am I someone who takes steroids? Am I who am I? Am I someone who can watch Friends with Vanessa? I'm trying to figure out who I am. And so at this time, I was also like flirting with praying. My parents raised me Buddhist vegetarian, but obviously it's a Christian nation, the United States. It's a big time JC place, and so I was flirting around with praying, and all of my prayers revolved around I would get my knees on the bed, and then I would put my thing on the windowsill at this apartment we were living at the time, and put my elbows on there, and I would pray, and I would say, please God, let Barry Bonds hit his 600th home run when I'm at the game tomorrow. Please God. So Barry Bonds also brought me to prayer. All right, so Christians, you got to support that. But I would literally pray, because he was also like this lottery, right? Where, I couldn't afford to go to every game. I couldn't pull that off. But I would, you would get tickets to certain games, or someone would, I had certain adults in my life who would get tickets occasionally to a game, and they say, we're going to this game. And then, you just hope, like, please let that be the game, And then you would get tickets, and you would hope, like, please let this be the game. So it was like this lottery. Like, could you get to the right game where one of these home runs happened? There's 162 games a season, which I think is like 82 home games, 81 home games, something like that. And during this era, I would get to somewhere between, I think the most I got to was like maybe 35 games in a year. And the least was maybe like 10. So I was going, 10 to 30 games. And if you could strategically place those 10 to 30 games to get to see some of these milestones, that was the game. That was the lottery that you were playing. And so I don't remember why I told you that part, but I guess let's. No, actually, I want to say one more thing before I get into the defense. And I know we're going long. Sorry, Anya. I know we're going long, but I want to talk one more thing about baseball, which is, so, because of Barry Bonds, I loved the San Francisco Giants. I loved, going to Giants games. It was the biggest thrill for me. And it was how I spent all my money. Like, every penny I had was spent on tickets to baseball games, concessions at baseball games, t-shirt jerseys. I loved t-shirt jerseys, which was basically like a baseball jersey that was just a graphic tee. It had the jersey thing with the name and the number on the back. I lived for a Giants t-shirt jersey as an early adolescent. I died for my Jason Schmidt Giants t-shirt jersey. Was like my lucky t-shirt. I wore it even into college because I would wear it on race days, because I wore it the day I won the JV 2-mile county final sophomore year. Anyways, I was obsessed with baseball. I loved going to the games. It was my biggest thing. And something that cracks me up is, like, I was such a good kid. Like I was, besides trying to buy the steroids, but even trying to buy the steroids, it's so fun. It's like kids were buying weed from Charlie. Kids were buying like fifths of vodka from Charlie. And I was like, can I get some steroids? Which is like, it's so childish. And so my thing was one of the only times I really lied to my parents, was, they would be like, hey, you can't listen to the radio while you're doing your homework. And I'd be like, fuck that. I'm going to listen to KMBR 680, the sports leader, while I do my homework. And the other big one was they, reasonably so, didn't want their 12-year-old son commuting an hour into the city by himself without the supervision of an adult into the city to go to Giants games. And me and my friend Neil were like, nah, fuck that. And so what we did was I would tell my parents that his parents would pick us up after the game, and he would tell his parents that my parents would pick us up after the game, and then we would just go into the city to watch the game by ourselves. And so we'd ride our bikes to the ferry building, take the ferry into San Francisco, walk down to the stadium, haggle with the ticket scalpers outside of the stadium. There'd always be, sorry to say it, but, well, I won't say it. There were some people, you can guess what kind of people they were. Maybe, anyways, there were some people selling tickets outside of the game, and we would go, 12-year-old children, like haggling with them, trying to get cheap tickets. And then we'd get our tickets. We'd get in the game. We'd always buy cheap tickets. And then we knew like little spots in the stadium where you could like climb a fence and then crawl through like a small hole and get up into the luxury suite section where they had like some like, better seats, better bathrooms, sometimes free food and shit. We'd do that. And then after the game, we'd walk into the Tenderloin, which is like one of the worst areas of the city where the late night bus could pick us up. And we would we'd like hang out for like 30 minutes in the Tenderloin waiting for this bus to show up, get on the bus, take it like an hour home to the ferry building, grab our bikes from the ferry building, and then ride our bikes another like half an hour, 40 minutes home, get home at like 1, 2 in the morning, and then go to school the next day. And that was like what we did until the jig came up eventually. Both of our parents were at a track meet together. We were both on the track team, and they're like, thank you so much. Thank you so much for always being the ones to pick up Patrick and Neil after the Giants games. We really appreciate it. And they're like, no. We thought you were the ones who were always picking Patrick and Neil up after the Giants games. Yikes. Luckily, at that point, by the time they figured it out, we were already like 15 or maybe 16. So they couldn't be too mad. They were upset, but they were also kind of like, well, I guess you got away with it. But that was our jam. That was the way I acted out in my early teen years. I wasn't going to parties. I wasn't drinking. I was just sneaking into the city to eat garlic fries and cheer on the Giants. And by the way, they were a below average baseball team when we were doing this. This was during a gully where they were like not a good team, and Barry Bonds was the only bright spot. So that's the kind of nerd who becomes a baseball writer. All right, so let's close this podcast strong. Let's close it up. Barry Bonds. Here's why denying Barry Bonds' Hall of Fame status is so stupid. Okay, by all accounts, at the earliest, he began taking steroids in 1998. Now, he joined the league in 1986, and so 1986 through 1997, he was already a Hall of Fame baseball player. Now, through 1997, he had 334 home runs and 380 stolen bases. And I believe he is the only member, or maybe one of like 3 or 4, I think he's the only member of the 300-300 club. The only player ever to hit more than 300 home runs and steal more than 300 bases. And he had done that in 1997 before he had ever taken any steroids. At that point, he was also one of 4 players ever to have a season in the 40-40 club, 40 home runs, 40 stolen bases in 1996. He's the only player ever to have a 5-time 30 for 30 season with his dad, which I already mentioned. So, already through 1997, those stats lend itself to Hall of Fame status. Also, by the 1999 or 1997 season, he was already a 3-time MVP. 3-time MVP in 1990, 1992, 1993. 7-time Golden Glove winner, meaning he was an incredibly talented defensive outfielder in left field. 7-time Golden Glove winner as a left fielder. 7-time Silver Slugger, which is Silver Slugger is an award they give for every position. The most productive offensive player for every position is a Silver Slugger. He won it 7 times. So through 1997, he's one of the only, if not the only, ever 300 club member. He's a 7-time Golden Glove winner, 7-time Silver Slugger, 3-time MVP. If he had retired then, he should have been a Hall of Famer already. Really. He should have been a Hall of Famer already. He was a Hall of Famer before he ever took steroids. Hall of Famer before he ever took steroids. Now, here's the thing. If we go on, he also then became, after the era where we know he took steroids, that he thought was flaxseed oil, by the way. I stand by Barry and the fact that he thought it was flaxseed oil. Was his trainer fucked him. So, but after that, he went on to become the only member of the 400 club, 400 home runs, 400 stolen bases. Then he went on to become the only member of the 500 club, 500 home runs, 500 stolen bases. Alone, if you steal 500 bases, if you have 500 career stolen bases, that alone is a Hall of Fame mark. That alone is minus the home runs. If you had 30 career home runs and 500 stolen bases, you would go to the Hall of Fame. And let's be honest, steroids is not helping you steal bases, So 500 career stolen bases, that in itself should get him into the Hall of Fame. So I think we've already made a clear argument. Pre-steroid, he was a Hall of Famer. He was a Hall of Famer, and this is in an era where people are already taking steroids. This is an era where Jose Canseco is already a thing. Sammy Sosa, Mark McGwire, which, by the way, if the accounting is true, the reason Barry Bonds got into steroids was that, in 1998, Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire had this incredible home run race. Everybody says, by the way, that it saved baseball. Baseball had a strike. The numbers were down. The ratings were down. And then Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire had this epic home run chase, battling each other out to take the new single-season record for home runs. And it breathed life back into baseball. And Barry was like, what the fuck? Both of these guys are taking steroids. And, I'm a 3-time MVP. I'm an amazing hitter. I'm an amazing base runner. I'm an amazing fielder. I play great defense. And, I'm like 5th now in the MVP ratings because everybody's taking steroids. And so he was like, fuck it, I got to take steroids too. And so when the greatest player of all time decides, hey, I'm also going to take steroids with the rest of the league to even the playing field, then you get these career crazy numbers that he went on to put up. And so, Barry Bonds, by the way, played for the Pittsburgh Pirates, 1986 through 1992. Then he moves to the San Francisco Giants, 1993, and he plays 1993 to 2007. My senior year of high school was his final year as a Giant. So he played 22 seasons. In and of itself, amazing. By the way, though, that's the real thing steroids gives you. It lets you play until you're very old, right? So I will give that caveat. But in that time, he went on to win 4 more MVPs. He's a 7-time MVP, and you have to think. Roger Clemens, the greatest starting pitcher from that era, came out. He was on steroids. Curt Schilling. A lot of these guys were on performance-enhancing drugs. The pitchers, too. People forget that. Everybody remembers the hitters having these crazy steroid-fueled home run binges. But the pitchers were also on the roids. Everybody was on the roids, okay? If you weren't doing the roids, you weren't that good. So you kind of had to do it. So he had to do it. He was already a Hall of Famer before he did the roids. The numbers already say he was a Hall of Famer before he started taking the steroids. And then he decided to even the playing field. And he went on to put up some amazing numbers. 7-time MVP, 12-time Silver Slugger, 14-time All-Star, 8-time Golden Glove winner. I mean, just with 500 stolen bases and 8 Golden Gloves, that alone should put you in the Hall of Fame. And 762 career home runs, the all-time record for home runs. He also holds, by the way, the all-time record for walks, 2,558 walks, which that's one of the most underrated parts about Barry Bonds' game, is he had such a good eye. He would not swing at anything outside of the strike zone, and you couldn't really throw it into the strike zone, or he might hit a home run or at least get a hit or something. And so he also holds the record for intentional walks. People would not throw him pitches. And that's the crazy thing is, in the steroid era, I mean, that in itself should even it out and make it count, is he got thrown to like a tiny fraction, of the number of pitches that were thrown to him as a batter. Probably like 10%, 20%, something like that, were actually pitches it was like a real at bat. They're trying to, throw strikes against him. 90% of the time, they would either pitch to him, but throw it way out of the strike zone, not give him anything to hit at, and he would take the walk, or they would intentionally walk him. They're like, let's not even risk that I accidentally, when I'm trying to throw it out of the strike zone, throw it into the strike zone and he hits it, or he finds a way to hit it even out of the strike zone. So that, I mean, the walks alone, the way they wouldn't pitch to him alone was also something that, I mean, you have to appreciate. And 298 career batting average. I mean, a 300 hitter, basically career over 22 seasons. That's not steroids. That's just good hitting. That's Hall of Fame. 514 career stolen bases. Again, that's something. Holds the single season home run record. I mean, asterisk or not, that's a thing. On base percentage, .444. Now, for people who don't understand baseball, hitting 300, that means that like 1/3 of the time you get a hit, which is incredibly successful. Hitting 300 is incredibly successful. In baseball, getting a hit 1/3 of the time is incredibly successful. And then getting on base, .444, that means almost half the time he went to the plate, he got on base, which is insane. That is an insane number. That is really, really good. And so, I mean, if you just go through 8 Gold Gloves, 14-time All-Star, 12-time Silver Slugger, 7-time MVP, the career home runs, the batting average, the stolen bases, the walks, the on-base percentage, almost had 3,000 hits. That's the other thing. He had 2,935 hits, which, by the way, he would have gotten to 3,000 hits if he wasn't forced out of the league. After 2007, basically, they didn't suspend him. They never officially caught him. But they basically just made it known you can't sign Barry Bonds, and no one did. And when he left, people were still not pitching to him. People still didn't want to pitch to him. It would have been interesting to see him play a couple more seasons. It would have really been interesting to see, like, did he fall apart? Or was he an amazing hitter? I wish we had that data to see after the time when he had, become a known steroid user to a time where it's like he can't be taking steroids anymore. And how does he still hold up? And so we can kind of see, like, how much of that skill was steroids, helping him stay through the grind. How much of that was steroids, and how much is he just the greatest baseball player of all time? And I think it would have proved that he is the greatest baseball player of all time. He was certainly helped by steroids. Steroids helped him have power. It helped his longevity. But, the walks, the on-base percentage, the hits, the stolen bases, that's not steroids. The Golden Gloves. I mean, it's just, It's totally incomprehensible to me that you could not let Barry Bonds in the Hall of Fame. I rest my case. Barry Bonds is a Hall of Famer. Fuck the Writers Association. Fuck those baseball nerds. They're dumb anyways. You're why the sport is dying. And Barry Bonds, you're my boy. I'm sorry that I almost took steroids because of you, but you're my boy, Barry. You're my boy. You're my boy. Barry Bonds, number 25, San Francisco Giants, greatest baseball player of all time. I rest my case.
Open stance, feet fairly close together, crowding the plate. The pitch, there's a long one to right field. Forget about it. This one is headed for New Jersey, high into the upper deck. Barry Bonds with a spectacular 3-run homer. And he has electrified Yankee Stadium. 3-0 Giants. And listen to the Yankee Stadium crowd as Bonds rounds the bases.